unhappiness of the American people in terms of the direction that this country is going. What people perceive and what the candidates are picking up on is that the middle class is shrinking. We have tens of millions of people who wake up in the morning, they go to the gas station, they're paying $3.20 for a gallon of gas. Home heating oil is soaring. In many cases, the wages of workers are going down. People are losing their health insurance. They're losing their pensions. They're seeing their jobs go to China and other low-wage countries. The people in our country do not feel good about the state of our economy. They want changes. They want to move this country in a different direction. And fundamentally, I believe what they want is a new set of national priorities. As you may know, Mr. President, just this afternoon, the Senate Budget Committee voted on and passed a new budget. This budget, appropriately enough, rejects President Bush's incredibly bad budget, which continues the process of providing huge tax breaks to people who don't need it, and then cutting back on the needs of the middle class and working families in terms of massive cuts in Medicare and Medicaid, eliminating completely the weatherization program, cutting back significantly on LIHEAP at a time when the need for heating assistance is greater now than ever before. And altogether, it is a budget which puts money where we should not be putting money, and cuts back on those programs which people desperately need. Mr. President, next week, as I understand it, the budget will be coming here to the Senate. We'll be debating the budget that was passed by the Budget Committee this afternoon. And while I happen to believe that the budget that we passed was a good budget, certainly a major improvement over what President Bush gave us, I happen to think we can make significant improvements upon what we passed this afternoon. So I'll be offering several amendments. The major one will essentially be asking the United States Senate to change the national priorities of this country, to begin responding to the millions of working families who know that something is wrong in America, that while poverty increases, while the middle class shrinks, the people on top have never had it so good, that ordinary people understand there is something strange, that the wealthiest nation in the history of the world cannot provide quality health care to all of its people, that our infrastructure is deteriorating before our very eyes, that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world, that all over our country food shelves are being descended upon, not by unemployed people alone, not by disabled people, not by poor people, but by people who are working 40 or 50 hours a week and can't afford with their wages to provide the nutrition that their families need. People understand there is something deeply wrong in this country, and that we've got to move in a new direction. Mr. President, my amendment is very simple, and it's going to give the members of the Senate a very stark choice about whether or not we really want change, about whether or not we really want to move this country in a new direction. And this is what it does. Couldn't be simpler. It says that at a time when the wealthiest people in this country have never had it so good since the 1920s, in terms of a huge increase in their income, in terms of the fact that we now have by far the most unequal distribution of income and wealth of any major country, where the top 1% now earn more income than the bottom 50%. What we are saying is that it is time that we rescind President Bush's tax breaks that go to people who make at least $1 million. That's the top 0.3% of 1%. 99.7% of the people would not be impacted by this amendment. And it says, let us rescind those tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. And when we do that, Mr. President, we will raise about $51 billion. Now, what can we do with that $51 billion? And what does this amendment include? First of all, it says that since President Bush has been in office, we've had record-breaking deficits. We now have a $9 trillion national debt. We are fighting a war that we're not paying for, that our kids and our grandchildren are paying for. So in this amendment of the $51 billion that we raised by rescinding tax breaks for millionaires, we're going to put $10 billion into deficit reduction. That leaves $41 billion left. And this is what this amendment would do. It would provide $15 billion for special education. Mr. President, you may remember that some years ago, the United States Congress, the government of the United States, made a commitment to school districts all over America and said if you mainstream kids with disability, if you put them into public schools, if you treat them like every other kid, we will provide 40% of the cost of that special education. That's what the government said. Unfortunately, the government did not keep its word. So what we see in Vermont, I suspect in Colorado, I suspect all over this country, what we see is that school districts are paying enormous sums of money out of local taxes, often regressive property taxes, to fund special education. And all over America, what we're seeing is more and more kids, for whatever reason, and that's a long discussion we need to have, for whatever reason, more and more kids are having problems, are being seen as special ed needs. It is an expensive proposition. So what we are saying is let's begin to keep our word to school districts all over America. Let's relieve the pressure of local property taxes. Let's put $15 billion into special education. In addition, what this amendment would do is provide a $7 billion increase for Head Start. Mr. President, what I happen to personally believe that one of the great scandals in our nation today is that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty, far, far higher than any other industrialized country, that working parents are finding it almost impossible to acquire quality, affordable child care, that the need for Head Start openings is much, much greater than can be accommodated all over this country. So we are saying that Head Start is a program that works. It provides an opportunity for early childhood education for low-income kids. Let's expand that program. Let's make sure that working families can take advantage of that program. Let's put $7 billion into expanding Head Start. We also, for the same reasons, put $2.2 billion into the Child Care and Development Block Grant Program to ensure that every eligible family receives access to child care. Mr. President, I know that in my state, and again I suspect in most states in this country, people are being weighed down by very, very high local taxes, including regressive property taxes. What this amendment does is provide $5 billion for school construction, modernization, and repairs to fix our crumbling schools. What this does not only help local property taxes, not only help our school kids get modern buildings in which to learn, what it also does is create a lot of jobs as we rebuild one of the long neglected areas of our infrastructure, and that is our crumbling schools. Mr. President, this amendment would also provide an additional $3 billion for LIHEAP, the Low-Income Heating Assistance Program. I just this afternoon spoke to the directors of various community action programs in the state of Vermont. And in my state may be a little bit different than other states because it gets pretty cold in Vermont. We've had weather not within the last couple of weeks of below 20 below zero weather. And there's a real level of stress regarding the availability of LIHEAP because the cost of home heating fuels are soaring. There is just not that availability. There is not enough money in the LIHEAP fund, and what we would do is put $3 billion more into LIHEAP, which helps, by the way, not only low-income families and senior citizens in the wintertime in cold weather states, but it helps those other families in states where the weather gets to be 110 degrees. Mr. President, as I mentioned earlier, in this great country, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we must be embarrassed that we have large numbers of people who literally go hungry, don't have enough food. That number is growing. I know that Senator Harkin, among others, has called for a significant increase in the food stamp program, and that is exactly what we should be doing. And this amendment would provide $5 billion for food stamps to make sure that millions of families with kids have enough food to sustain them. And lastly, this amendment would provide $3.8 billion to allow the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children, the WIC program, provide nutritious food to over 4 million families. Kids whose mothers have good nutrition and good prenatal experience obviously will do better in life, and we want to make sure that the WIC program has the resources that they need. So ultimately, what this amendment is about is pretty simple. We say that in a time when millions of Americans, low and moderate income people, are in need, we say that it is the obligation and the right of the United States government to reach out and address those serious problems facing the middle class and working families of our nation. And at a time when the wealthiest people in this country have never had it so good, and at the same time have been given huge tax breaks by the Bush administration, we say that it is appropriate to rescind those tax breaks in order to help millions of people in need. And that's what this amendment is about. It calls for a fundamental change in national priorities, and it moves this country in a very different and, I think, more moral direction. So I would look forward to support from my colleagues for this amendment, which we will offer as part of the budget debate. I thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor, and I gather I note the absence of a quorum.